In the years following the First World War, American military doctrine regarding armored vehicles languished in a state of flux and constrained ambition. The strategic landscape of the 1920s and 30s, shaped profoundly by the Great Depression, imposed severe budgetary limitations on any significant tank development. Funding remained scarce. The very concept of a tank's role was itself a subject of internal debate. Prevailing pre-war doctrine insisted tanks were primarily for infantry support, not designed to engage other tanks directly. This foundational belief dictated early designs, focusing on machine guns and smaller caliber main guns. The anti-tank role, it was argued, would later be fulfilled by specialized tank destroyers, further fragmenting this nascent capability, the US to restraint but each many capability, the USA. Army Tank Corps, a vital innovation of World War I, was officially abolished in 1920. This decision diffused responsibility and fueled interbranch rivalries between infantry and cavalry, each vying for control over armored development. Early American endeavors often mirrored British concepts, drawing inspiration from vehicles like the British Mark A Whippet medium tank, weighing approximately 15 tons. Prototypes emerged, each an iterative step in a slow process. The 23-ton medium tank M 1921, armed with a British-designed 6-pounder main gun, was followed by the M1 1922, which was near identical, even sharing a British suspension. These were further refined into the medium tank T1, re-engined with a Packard gasoline unit. A peculiar yet influential concept was the convertible tank, pioneered by inventor made by inventor J. Walter Christie, whose designs included the M1 1919, M 1921, and T3. These vehicles sought to operate on both tracks and wheels. The 11-ton T3, for example, could achieve speeds over 40 miles per hour on its rubber-rimmed road wheels. This reflected the significant limitations of early track technology and the perceived need for greater strategic mobility. Though ultimately flawed, the convertible principle drove experimentation and the development of novel suspension systems. It was within this environment of incrementalism that the Ordnance Department developed the vertical volute spring suspension, or VVSS, a crucial innovation first seen on the combat car T5 in 1934. This suspension, along with live-track technology using durable rubber blocks on steel links, would become foundational for future American tanks. By 1938, a step towards standardization was finally taken with the medium tank M2. Based on the earlier T5 prototype, this 15-ton vehicle, powered by a 268-horsepower Continental engine, was armed with a single 37mm tank gun, M3. Its armor, a face-hardened type, still reflected the thinking of a bygone era. The M2A1, which entered production in December 1940, offered improvements: a larger turret, increased armor averaging 1.26 inches or 32 millimeters, and a more powerful 400-horsepower Wright engine. However, even this improved design was born of WW1-era thinking, a significant handicap that American tankers would soon have to learn the hard way. The perceived urgency, a gradual creep rather than a sudden jolt, began to intensify with the outbreak of war in Europe in 1939. But the truly catalytic event would be the swift and unexpected fall of France in 1940. France, with what was then considered the best army in Europe, collapsed in a matter of weeks under the onslaught of Germany's blitzkrieg. This profound shock exposed the obsolescence of US Army armored thinking and its equipment. The realization was immediate and sobering. Just 2 weeks after France's surrender, on July 10, 1940, the armored force was formally established. This marked a fundamental shift in USA inches, Army doctrine and organization, finally overcoming the long-standing interbranch rivalries. The need for rapid rearmament became paramount. Congress authorized significant funding, and the challenge of mass production was thrust upon an unprepared nation. The medium tank M2A1, despite its recent standardization, was recognized as critically obsolete even before its mass production could truly begin. Its thin armor and 37mm gun were no match for German designs like the PCAD.KPFT IV, which, though still armed with a low-velocity short-barreled 75mm gun, had already seen combat in Poland in 1939. The imperative for a new, more capable tank was undeniable. In June 1940, a pivotal meeting took place between William S. Tooke, Knudsen, head of the National Defense Advisory Commission, and K.T. Keller of Chrysler. This initiated the audacious plan to turn civilian industry towards the mass production of medium tanks. On August 15, 1940, Chrysler was awarded a contract for 1,000 M2A1s. Yet, within days, on August 28, that contract was superseded by an order for 1,000 M3 medium tanks. Only 94 M2A1s were eventually built, primarily serving as training vehicles. The M2A1, a product of slow interwar evolution, was deemed obsolete before it ever reached the battlefield. The M3, therefore, was a hastily developed interim design. It sought to address the immediate need for heavier armor and a more powerful 75mm gun. This primary armament, the 75mm gun M2, was unusually mounted in the right front upper hull, an expedient born from its derivation from a cancelled anti-aircraft gun. Unlike the M2's face-hardened armor, the M3 utilized rolled homogeneous armor plates with a cast homogeneous armor turret armed with a 37mm anti-tank gun M6 and a coaxial .30 caliber machine gun. Its front glacis, a welded armor plate, was 2 inches thick and sloped at 30 degrees, surpassing the PZ.K FPT fuel. IV's thickest armor of 1.2 inches. However, the rushed nature of its design left the M3 with critical flaws. At 10 feet 3, it was significantly taller than its German counterparts, making it a conspicuous target. The use of riveted armor construction, though efficient for rapid production, proved vulnerable, with rivets often being driven into the fighting compartment and seams parting under fire. Furthermore, it inherited the underpowered 9-cylinder Continental radial engine from the M2A1. Despite these deficiencies, the rapid shift to industrial mass production was underway. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, the first plant specifically built for this purpose, became a symbol of America's burgeoning industrial might. By the end of the war, it would produce an astonishing 22,234 tanks. By August 1942, 4 companies had built nearly 5,000 M3 units. This unprecedented capacity laid the groundwork for America's future warfighting contribution. The M3's operational performance would soon be tested. Its first combat action occurred on November 28, 1942, in Tunisia. It was a baptism of fire that would expose its deficiencies and underscore the continuous need for technological advancement in tank design. As Major General Ernest N. Harmon later stated, it was criminal to send an armored division into battle with the M3 tank. The last combat action for the gun-armed M3 series would be in November 1943 at Makin Atoll. The M3, though initially a stopgap measure, became a crucial learning ground for both American and British tank development. Following the fall of France in the summer of 1940, Britain had suffered immense tank losses, and its own industrial capacity was insufficient to meet the urgent need for replacements. Thus, under the provisions of the Lend-Lease Act, passed on March 11, 1941, Britain sought American production. The US and U sought American production. The US, until a perfection to the US, until a perfections maybe, Army, however, was reluctant to produce tanks solely for Britain, fearing obsolescence if Britain itself fell. A compromise was struck. British ordered tanks had to be acceptable to US chains, Army standards. This led to the M3 grant, the British designation for their modified M3s. The British Tank Mission, headed by Mr. Michael Dewar, placed an order for almost 3,000 units. British tankers were particularly dissatisfied with the high profile of the original US M3 design, especially the commander's machine gun-armed cupola. This led to a significant modification. The British grant featured a lower, larger, roomier cast armor turret, a 2-piece split overhead hatch with a 360-degree periscope, and no commander's cupola, reducing its height over the periscope to 9 feet 11 inches. Additionally, the radio, positioned in the superstructure on US M3s, was relocated to the turret for the grant, allowing the tank commander direct access. These M3 grants first saw action in North Africa in May 1942 during the Gazala battles. Their encounter with German forces proved immediately decisive. The M3 Grant's 75mm gun M2 outranged and outpenetrated the existing German tank guns, such as the PZ.K P303, 3's 5cm Core K, 38 L42, and the early PZ.K FTFTA, IV's 7.5cm Core K, 37 L24. Its APCT projectiles could easily penetrate German medium tank frontal armor at ranges up to 1,531 yards. British tankers also noted that the American 75mm and 37mm guns could fire indefinitely. Compared to their own 2-pounder guns, which often required refilling oil buffers, the German response, as noted by General Erwin Rommel in his diary, was one of shock. Lieutenant Colonel George Witheridge, describing the M3 Grant's first engagement, recalled seeing vast dust clouds and hundreds of tanks en masse in tight formation. His unit, starting with just 19 Grants, 16 Stuarts, found their new tanks had a critical tactical advantage. This temporary battlefield dominance, however, was short-lived. By the fall of 1942, the German army began fielding the upgunned PG.KFT Fit 40 IV Osfer F2, armed with the 7.5cm Quar 40 L43 gun. This new weapon could penetrate the M3's frontal armor at 1,640 yards, effectively negating the Grant's initial advantage and signaling the rapid evolution of tank warfare. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, by August 1942, had decided to drop the general prefix from the British tank names, thus the M3s became known simply as Grant or Lee. The M3 chassis, meanwhile, was a continuous platform for experimentation. Early versions suffered from numerous component failures in their suspension system, which was largely based on the lighter M2 series. This led to redesigns and strengthened vertical volute spring suspension. The experimental Guiberson T142 diesel engine, installed in some M3A1s, did not live up to expectations. The M3A1's cast armor upper hull also created a production bottleneck, as too few foundries could produce the large castings. Continuous design iterations led to numerous variants. 300 M3A1s were built between January and July 1942, 12 M3A2s between January and March 1942, 322 M3A3s between March and December 1942, and 591 M3A5s during the same period. The M3A3 and M3A5, referred to as Grant II by the British, were powered by twin General Motors diesel engines, often featuring a lengthened rear hull to accommodate them. Even minor features were scrutinized. Armored doors on the upper hull of early M3s proved weak spots during ballistic testing. The M3's gyrostabilizer for the main gun, while offering limited accuracy on the move, was seldom employed in combat due to its sensitivity to uneven terrain. The M3, despite its flaws, served as a vital stopgap, allowing the British Army to maintain a significant armoured presence in North Africa and later in Burma. Its combat experience provided invaluable data that directly informed the design of later, more successful, American tanks like the M4s. The collaborative production and modification process also fostered a degree of technological exchange between the US and Britain. Moreover, 1,386 M3 series tanks were provided to the Red Army under Lend-Lease, and about 100 were received by the Brazilian Army, demonstrating its widespread, if imperfect, utility. The limitations of the M3 medium tank, especially its engine configurations, necessitated the rapid development of its successor, the M4. Engine shortages were a persistent challenge, with the growing demand for gasoline and diesel engines by other military branches directly leading to improvised and experimental engine arrangements in the M3 series. For example, the M3A3s and M3A5s were equipped with twin diesel engines, providing 410 gross horsepower. One of the most ambitious solutions was the Chrysler A57 multibank engine, an improvised monster comprising 5 Chrysler automobile engines, a total of 30 cylinders, which required an 11-inch engine compartment extension. An Ordnance Department report in 1942 even favored diesel engines for their superior mileage and cruising range. The M3's design, while functional as an interim measure, presented issues with crew size, armor protection, and armament placement, all of which the M4 sought to address. The sheer volume of tanks required by the war effort pushed for designs that could be manufactured quickly and efficiently. This influenced choices like cast versus welded hulls. The M3 series, however, also became a proving ground for adaptability. Between October 1942 and December 1943, 807 M3 series units were converted into tank recovery vehicles, designated M31 and M31D2. These M31 series vehicles were equipped with a 30-ton capacity winch and a gar wood crane, making them indispensable for recovering damaged tanks. To conceal their D-gun status, they even featured dummy 37mm and 75mm guns. The British designated their Lend-Lease armoured recovery vehicles as Grant ARV-I and Grant ARV-II. The M3 chassis also underpinned the Canadian/British Ram-2 medium tank, though armed with a 6-pounder or 57mm gun. Specialised roles also emerged. The British Canal Defence Light, or CDL, concept saw approximately 110 British M3s converted to house a high-intensity carbon arc lamp in place of the 37mm turret. These were never employed in combat by the British. The US Army converted 497 units, both M3 and M3A1s, as shop tractor T10 or leaflet vehicles. They saw limited combat use in the spring of 1945, protecting Rhine River crossing points from floating mines. The true leap forward came with the medium tank T6 prototype, the direct ancestor of the M4 Sherman. Development began on February 1, 1941. Key features included the retention of the M3 chassis and its continental radial engine. The T6 was initially armed with the 75mm gun M2, as the more advanced M3 was not yet ready. It also incorporated the elevation gyro-stabilizer system from the M3 series tanks. Its turret featured an electro-hydraulic power traverse unit, capable of rotating 360 degrees in just 17 seconds. The T6 commander's cupola was armed with a .30 caliber machine gun, bringing its overall height to 9 feet 6. Based on early feedback and a push for a lower profile, the T6 underwent significant revisions. The commander's cupola was eliminated, replaced by a rotating split hatch with an M6 periscope, reducing the tank's height to 9 feet. A single escape hatch was also added to the hull floor. On September 5, 1941, the M4 was standardized, with additional requirements for a ball mount for the Bow .30 caliber machine gun and a .50 caliber anti-aircraft machine gun. The M4A1 designation was applied to cast armor upper hulls, while the M4 designation was for welded armor upper hulls. Lima Locomotive Works delivered the first M4A1 in February 1942. Ultimately, 6,281 M4A1 units were built by 3 firms until December 1943, while 6,748 M4 units were completed between July 1944. A March 1942 directive eliminated the 2 fixed, forward-firing hull-mounted .30 caliber machine guns from the M4 and M4A1. The M4 welded hull carried 97 rounds of 75mm ammunition, while the M4A1, the common engine, was the 9-cylinder, Continental Motors gasoline-powered, air-cooled radial engine R975C1, producing 400 horsepower at 2,400 revolutions per minute. The M4A1's maximum sustained speed was 21 miles per hour, with a top speed of 24 miles per hour. While authorized storage for .30 caliber machine gun ammunition was 4,750 rounds, records show approximately 100,000 rounds expended in a single day's engagement near Étouville, France. The .50 caliber machine gun, with an authorized storage of 600 rounds, was generally considered less practical for ground targets than the .30 caliber. Marine Corps tanker Jim Carroll, for instance, recalled not mounting the .50 caliber in the Pacific Theater due to intense Japanese fire. The U.S. Marine Corps, recognizing the limitations of light tanks in the Pacific, had specifically requested M4 series tanks. The M4A2 China Gal, pictured on Tarawa in November 1943, demonstrated the M4's utility in demanding Pacific environments. A War Department report from April 1944 revealed that tank crews consistently prioritized ammunition accessibility and quantity over protection, a crucial insight that would drive future design. The M4 Sherman series, while a workhorse of the Allied effort, was fundamentally a tank defined by iterative development and design compromises. The urgency of World War II production demanded rapid design and deployment, leading to the adoption of the M3 chassis and a relentless focus on manufacturing speed over perfection. Logistical limitations were also critical. Existing cranes on transport ships and portable bridges limited the maximum load capacity to approximately 35 tons, with 1-inch thick armor plate weighing 40 pounds per square foot. This constraint significantly dictated armor thickness and overall design. The need to arm American forces quickly in North Africa led to the deployment of M4 series tanks, despite their crews' initial inexperience against seasoned German forces. The welded armor glacis of the M4 and M4A1 2 inches thick and sloped at 56 degrees, and the cast armor turret 3 to 3.5 inches thick on the gun shield with 2-inch sidewalls were considered robust for their time. However, early M4s had narrow overhead hatches for the driver and bow gunner due to the steep glacis slope. Direct vision slots, identified as ballistic weak spots, were eliminated and replaced by fixed M6 periscopes. Later, M4A3s saw weld-on armor plates added to the driver and bow gunner hatch hoods for increased frontal protection, and crews often improvised further, welding spare track links onto hulls and turrets. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 was a brutal awakening for inexperienced USU tankers. It exposed the M4's vulnerabilities and led to a critical reassessment of its combat performance and crew survivability. Over 100 American tanks, mostly M4 series, were lost in what was described as a rout. Crucially, observations from British officers stated, "It is the ammunition, not the gasoline, that burns." A US of bears a legend to the burns. A US Army report in June 1945 later confirmed that 60 to 90% of fires in M4 75mm tanks originated in ammunition stowage, not from breached fuel tanks, debunking a persistent myth. Engine variations also presented logistical challenges. The M4A2 was powered by twin liquid-cooled GM diesel engines. It offered excellent horsepower to weight ratio, low fuel consumption, and a 150-mile range compared to 120 miles for gasoline M4s. Its less flammable diesel fuel and dual-engine redundancy, allowing a return to safety on one engine, were significant combat advantages. However, it was sensitive to dirt, leading to shorter engine life and poorer reliability. Major Richard Schmidt of the 4th Tank Battalion documented instances of M4A2s surviving magnetic mine explosions, with one engine destroyed but remaining operational and safe. Conversely, the M4A3, equipped with the Ford GAA engine, delivering 500 horsepower, demonstrated superior performance in comparative tests. It was declared superior to any other medium tank power plant, leading to its recommendation for active theaters. Despite this, the U.S. War Department, in March 1942, issued a policy of supplying only gasoline-powered M4s for overseas American forces to standardize fuel. This policy was challenged by battlefield experience. Lieutenant Colonel William R. Rip Collins, initially critical of the M4A2, later saw his unit develop a strong preference for it due to its combat performance. Yet, under Lend-Lease, significant numbers of M4A2s were supplied to Allied nations, 5,041 to Britain, 1990 to the Soviets, and approximately 400 to the Free French. 7,167 M4A4s also went to Britain, where they were designated Sherman V. The varied engine types and hull configurations created a complex logistics and maintenance landscape. General George S. Patton's Third Army, for instance, even utilized returned M4A2 and M4A4 tanks during the Battle of the Bulge. The M4 series became the backbone of Allied armored forces, proving adaptable and producible in vast numbers. British designations further illustrate this. The M4 was Sherman I, the M4A1, Sherman II, the M4A2, Sherman III, and the M4A4, Sherman V. Despite early struggles, The established development pathways and industrial capacity enabled America's unprecedented wartime production of 88,140 tanks between 1939 and 1945. By mid-1944, the M4 Sherman tank, despite continuous upgrades, suffered from significant design and strategic shortcomings. Its initial design was ill-suited for the evolving nature of tank warfare, particularly against the formidable German heavy tanks that were increasingly prevalent. American designers had underestimated German advancements in anti-tank weaponry, and the prevailing U.S. Army doctrine, championed by figures like Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, viewed tanks primarily as instruments of exploitation rather than direct combat vehicles designed to fight other tanks. This doctrine led to a reliance on specialized tank destroyers and contributed to the M4's firepower deficit. The introduction of formidable German tanks, such as the Panther and Tiger, whose frontal armor far exceeded the penetration capabilities of the M4's standard 75mm gun, proved a critical turning point. The Panther, for example, with 80mm of frontal armor sloped at 55 degrees, was impervious to the M4's 75mm rounds. Its own 7.5cm Quak 42L70 gun, firing PZs 3940 seconds rounds at over 3,000 feet per second, could penetrate 3.5 inches of armor at over 2,000 yards. This disparity led to alarmingly high loss rates for M4 series tanks, the USJs and IN-4 series tanks. 3rd Armored Division, between June 1944 and the war's end, lost 648 tanks completely destroyed and 700 more knocked out but repaired. These were often tragically referred to as death traps. Allied tankers, facing these new threats, resorted to desperate field modifications. They welded up to 170 sandbags per tank, added wire mesh screening on hatches, and even wooden planking or cement coatings, sometimes intended to counter magnetic mines. General Patton, however, objected to sandbags due to the strain they placed on suspension components. Tests by the 709th Tank Battalion showed that cement, while reducing internal damage from Panzerschreck rockets, did not prevent penetration. In the Pacific Theater, Marine Corps M4A2 tanks on Iwo Jima faced a different, but equally lethal threat. Suicidal Japanese infantry with explosive charges, heavily camouflaged anti-tank guns, and cunning tactics like tying aerial bombs to yardsticks for demolitions of ties. Marine Corps tankers applied sandbags to engine decks and steel mesh covers to hatches. C Company, 4th Marine Tank Battalion, even used wooden boards with a 4-inch gap for cement, intended to defeat magnetic mines. The M4's fire control also suffered deficiencies. Periscope dispersion issues caused significant inaccuracy, often forcing reliance on artillery methods for targeting. The M55 telescope optics were described as unsatisfactory, with poor light transmission, and gunners reported difficulty positioning for coaxial telescopes. In contrast, a gunner once recalled seeing blades of grass at a mile with a PZ.KP5YV sight. A crucial solution to the M4's firepower deficit emerged from Britain. The 17-pounder 76.2mm Mark IV gun, mounted in the Sherman VC Firefly. By D-Day, approximately 350 Fireflies were in British service, and by the war's end, 2,200 had been constructed. The U.S. Army, however, initially denied requests for Fireflies, and later declined an offer of 17-pounder guns, largely due to doctrinal inertia and perceived tank shortages. Programmed to rearm 100 M4s with the 17-pounder saw only 80 completed, none of which were issued to field units before the war's end. This illustrated that while turret armor thickening and improved gun shields were introduced, more significant upgrades like the 90mm gun, trial installed on an M4 hull in summer 1944, were deemed too late for mass production, with the M26 heavy tank arriving too late and in insufficient numbers to decisively impact the war. The M4 Sherman tank, while a capable platform, underwent continuous and significant battlefield-driven modifications throughout World War II. It evolved from its initial first-generation design into a more formidable second-generation machine. These upgrades were reactive to combat experience and aimed at improving crew survivability, ballistic protection, and combat effectiveness, demonstrating the highly iterative nature of military technology development. By spring 1943, a broad program was initiated to upgrade early production M4 tanks with combat-proven improvements, marking the beginning of widespread field and depot modifications. Specific ballistic weak points were addressed. 1.5-inch thick welded armor plates were added to the drivers and bowgunners' hatch hoods, and add-on armor plates were placed on the right front of cast armor turrets to address machined-away interior walls. A quick fix for ammunition fires, a critical vulnerability, involved retrofitting the 75mm rounds, thin steel containers, with 0.25-inch armor plates. 1-inch welded armor plates were added to the exterior of upper hulls opposite ammunition racks. Mobility improvements were also paramount. Duckbill-shaped devices, called extended end connectors, were introduced to increase track width. Chrysler designed a spacer system for sprockets to accommodate these wider tracks, designating tanks fitted with it as EDA 9. The most significant mobility upgrade was the horizontal volute spring suspension, or HVSS system. This replaced the narrower 16.56-inch wide tracks with 23-inch wide tracks, reducing ground pressure from 14.5 pounds per square inch to approximately 10 pounds per square inch. Hatch and crew egress enhancements also followed. A small overhead oval hatch was fitted in the roof for the loader starting in November 1943, a direct response to crew egress issues identified in combat. Drivers' and bowgunners' hatches received locks and counterbalance springs. A newly designed vehicle commander's cupola with 6 laminated bullet-resistant glass vision blocks further improved situational awareness and protection. The evolution of the pistol port provides a clear example of iterative design. Initially deleted from production units starting in April 1943 due to ballistic concerns and welded shut on existing tanks, it was reintroduced into production starting November 1943. This reversal came after user feedback emphasized its utility in ammunition resupply. Nonetheless, the majority of M4 series tanks in the European theatre of operations in 1944 either had no pistol ports or had them welded shut. A more powerful 76.2mm main gun, designated M1A1, M1A1C, or M1A2, became central to the second-generation M4. This necessitated a new, larger, cast armor turret, originally developed for the T-23 medium tank, and a combination gun mount M62, 3.5 inches thick. Perhaps the most critical safety upgrade was wet ammunition stowage, or AMUDAMP. Main gun rounds were relocated to lower hull storage racks within liquid-filled metal insert containers. The designation W for wet stowage became a crucial identifier for these improved tanks. The first M4A1-76W units, without HVSS, were produced in January 1944, seeing combat employment in Operation Cobra in July of that year. The M4A2-76W and M4A3-76W followed. The M4A3-76W, with 4,542 units built between March 1944 and April 1945, was a workhorse. The M4A3-75W, with 3,075W with 3,075 pilot tanks with HVSS were designated M4E8, M4A1E8, M4A2E8, the M4A3E8, the M4A3-76 WHVSS, a significantly improved model, reached Northwest Europe in December 1944, just as the Battle of the Bulge. British Lend-Lease designations like Sherman II for M4A1, 76W and Sherman III for M4A1, 76W with HVSS further attest to the global impact of these continuously refined vehicles. The M4 series tank, while a vital and mass-produced workhorse, underwent continuous and significant battlefield-driven modifications. These improvements, particularly in its second generation, addressed tactical shortcomings and evolving battlefield demands. However, the adoption of these upgrades was often met with resistance from entrenched military doctrine and logistical concerns. The 76mm gun, intended to improve armor penetration against newer German tanks, faced significant challenges. A post-war US is wrong. A post-war USA Army Memorandum, Characteristics for Tank Guns, described the 76mm gun's muzzle blast. as practically impossible to observe fire from the tank, blinding crews and making follow-up shots difficult. Major General Alvan Cullum Gillum Jr., commander of 13 Corps, advocated for retaining the 75mm gun due to its less severe muzzle blast. The Ordnance Department responded with solutions: a longer primer in the 76mm cartridge case and a redesigned combination muzzle brake and blast deflector for the 76mm gun M1A1. The 76mm gun M1A1C featured threaded barrels for muzzle brake fitting, and the M1A2 had a tighter rifling twist for improved projectile stability and penetration. Bain Jr. of the 2nd Armored Division, in a March 1945 report, stated that muzzle brakes were a great help and an essential part of the tank gun, despite demonstrations in Great Britain in April 1944, where senior USA Army officers were impressed with the 76mm cannon's firepower. Hesitation to adopt it remained. Brigadier General Joseph A. Brigadier General Joseph A. Holly's memo characterized its adoption as an excessive price for the additional inch of armor penetration obtained. Lieutenant General Leslie J.J. McNair, a staunch champion of the tank destroyer concept, favored the 75mm gun for its better high-explosive round for infantry support and to prevent tank-on-tank engagements, thus preserving his doctrinal purity. Lieutenant General Patton initially desired to test the 76mm gun in separate battalions after the invasion of France, but later planned to retrofit first-generation M4s with 76mm guns after the Battle of the Bulge. The effectiveness of the 76mm gun also depended on its ammunition. The M62 APC-T round, a 25-pound round with a 15-pound projectile, had a muzzle velocity of 2,600 feet per second, capable of penetrating approximately 3.7 inches of armor at 500 yards. The M93 hypervelocity armor-piercing tracer, or HVP, hypershot, with its lightweight 9.4-pound tungsten carbide core projectile, achieved a muzzle velocity of 3,400 feet per second, capable of penetrating 6.2 inches of armor at 500 yards. However, crews rarely received more than 2 rounds of HVP per tank, with priority given to tank destroyers. This prioritization, combined with the USEAT per Army's 13th Tank Battalion in Italy, expending 19,634 high-explosive rounds versus only 55 M62 APC-T rounds between August and December 1944, illustrates the continued focus on infantry support. Wet ammunition storage, with its liquid-protected main gun ammunition stowage, replaced full turret baskets with partial ones to improve crew survivability. Second-generation 76mm tanks typically stored 71 rounds with an additional armored box for ready rounds under the gunner's 50-0. The M4A3 75W, however, could carry 104 rounds, with 10 vertical racks each holding 10 rounds in subfloor storage, accessible through armored hatches. Beyond firepower, the M4 series also adapted for specific roles. The M32 series tank recovery vehicles, converted from surplus M4 tanks, were equipped with a 30-ton Garwood winch and a crane boom. However, they were criticized for narrow tracks and open turrets. The British developed their own ARV variants, including the Sherman ARV-IM-2 and the Beach Armored Recovery Vehicles, or BARVs, waterproofed M4A2s, capable of wading through 9 feet of water for beach landings. For close-quarters combat, the E45 auxiliary flame gun could be mounted in place of the front hull machine gun on M4 series tanks, offering a 60-yard range. Even as the M4 series was refined, the Ordnance Department pursued potential replacements. The T-20 series tanks, developed as a future medium tank, featured a simpler box-like hull and focused on improved firepower and armor. While specific T-20 prototypes were cancelled, their design principles and components, particularly the cast armor turret, heavily influenced subsequent M4 variants and future tank designs like the T-26, precursor to the M26 Pershing. The T-23 pilot vehicles, which used a General Electric drive and steering system, were found too complex for typical USA Army mechanics, a lesson learned for later designs. The M4 medium tank while a formidable platform saw significant tactical innovation through a series of specialized modifications and accessories. These were particularly crucial in its later war roles, addressing critical battlefield needs in areas like flamethrower support, mine clearance, and amphibious assault. These adaptations, however, often came with their own limitations and developmental hurdles, implicitly challenging the idea that the M4 was solely a general-purpose medium tank. Flamethrower tanks, for instance, evolved significantly. Early auxiliary flamethrowers, like the E6R3 and E12R3, were hull-mounted. They carried only 24 gallons of fuel, providing a mere 20 to 30 seconds of flame time, with an average flame length of about 30 yards. Furthermore, mechanical trouble and poor fuel reduced the efficiency of these weapons about 75%. The breakthrough came with turret-mounted versions. M4 series tanks modified to accommodate these were designated POA-CWSH. These Zippo tanks, nicknamed for their reliability, carried 290 gallons of fuel in 4 tanks, projecting long 100 yards jets of flame. The 713th Armored Flamethrower Tank Battalion on Okinawa, in just 75 days of combat, was credited with killing 4,788 Japanese soldiers, demonstrating the weapon's devastating effectiveness against fortified enemy positions. The even more versatile POA-CWSH-5 configuration mounted the flamethrower alongside the main armament, either a 75mm or 105mm gun. Mine clearance also drove innovation. The British Crab flail system, an iconic adaptation, utilized 43 large chains attached to the front of an M4, capable of breaching minefields at a maximum speed of 1.25 miles per hour. However, M4 series tanks, equipped with roller or disc mine exploders, remained vulnerable to offset mines, delay action mine fuses, and large explosive charges, as German mine techniques and equipment were considered superior to our own. Other devices included the Demolition Snake M2, a 400-foot-long device with a double row of explosive cartridges. It failed during the assault on Fort Bryant due to breakups and structural damage, but proved successful at Anzio, blowing through minefields with a great demoralizing effect on the enemy. The T-12 mine exploder used 25 spigot mortars capable of launching 115-pound T-13 high-explosive shells. Amphibious operations, another critical challenge, led to the development of duplex drive, or DD tanks. These featured an inflatable canvas screen for flotation and 2 rear-mounted propellers. Their promise of crucial armored support during amphibious landings fundamentally altered initial assault tactics. However, their vulnerability was brutally exposed during the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach, where the 741st U.S. Army Tank Battalion lost 27 of their 29 DD tanks attempting to swim ashore due to rough water and unexpected conditions. In the Pacific Theater, the M19 flotation device, consisting of large compartmented steel floats, allowed propulsion via the tank's tracks. Deep water fording kits, using tall sheet metal trunks for air intake and exhaust, allowed M4 tanks to cross surf lines 6 feet deep. Improvised versions of these kits were first used during Operation Husky in Sicily in July 1943. Even in engineering support roles, the M4 chassis proved invaluable. The M1 and M1A1 tank-mounted bulldozers, utilizing a straight toothless blade, were highly effective in the pursuit of the Germans in Italy, clearing obstacles like blown bridges and houses. These modifications and accessories transformed the M4 into a more versatile fighting vehicle, enhancing its effectiveness in specialized combat roles and directly impacting casualty rates and operational success in key Pacific and European campaigns. The development of USFs about the Europeans of USFE desaturating light tanks in the interwar period was a fragmented and often contradictory process. Following the First World War, the French Renault FT-17, designated the 6-ton tank M1 1917, became the baseline for early light tank requirements, necessitating a 37mm main gun and coaxial .30 caliber machine gun with frontal armor to defeat .30 caliber machine gun fire, all within a maximum 5-ton weight, transportable by truck. Budgetary constraints from the Great Depression severely limited funding, and inter-branch rivalries continued. with the infantry branch focusing on tanks and the cavalry branch pursuing combat cars for reconnaissance. This led to classification disputes and delayed progress. From 1927 to 1928, James Cunningham, Son and Company was awarded a contract for the T1 pilot program. This tank, powered by an 8-cylinder, 110-horsepower gasoline engine, demonstrated superiority to the M-17. However, the standardization of an improved version, the T1E1, was ordered withdrawn by the Secretary of War in March 1928, a significant setback demonstrating the power of higher political and military decisions over ordnance recommendations. The innovative but often difficult to work with designs of J. Walter Christie, such as his M1931, presented both advanced concepts and significant bureaucratic hurdles. Weighing 11 tons, it was too heavy for truck transport. The infantry saw it as a medium tank, while the cavalry viewed it as a combat car. Ultimately, the Ordnance Department took development independently after Christie, marking a shift from relying on external inventors to internal design and engineering. This period saw the development of the Ordnance Department's own volute spring suspension system and the T16 track system, featuring smooth rubber blocks vulcanized around steel links, leading to the crucial vertical volute spring suspension, or VVSS. The combat car M1, standardized in 1935, featured a 4-man crew and 2 small turrets, one with a .50 caliber and the other a .30 caliber machine gun. Its weight increased to 9 tons. Only 89 units were built between 1935 and 1937. The combat car M2A2, nicknamed Mae West for its twin turrets, had a maximum armor thickness of just 0.625 inches. 237 units were built in 1937, with the later M2A3 having increased bogie wheel spacing and armor up to 0.875 inches. The Spanish Civil War, from 1936 to 1939, provided a stark, real-world demonstration of the limitations of under-armored and under-gunned light tanks, directly pushing for better designs. The light tank M2A4, standardized in December 1938, was a step forward, a 4-man crew, a single turret armed with a 37mm gun, M3A1, redesignated M5, and a coaxial .30 caliber machine gun, and maximum armor thickness of 1 inch, at 12 tons. 375 units were completed by American Car and Foundry Company. It saw combat use with the USA, Marine Corps on Guadalcanal, and 36 units were sent to the British under Lend-Lease. The US and Kudkirmshus, How There and Lend-Lease. The US and Kudkirmshus. Marine Corps also pursued independent development with the Marmon Harrington CTL-363A. This approximate 5-ton turretless vehicle, armed with 3 machine guns, proved mechanically unreliable, underpowered, and possessed insufficient armor. It was significantly outperformed by Army vehicles in April 1939 trials. The formation of the Armored Force in July 1940 was a crucial turning point, consolidating tank development under a single entity and ending the confusing combat car versus light tank designers. The M2A4, though an improvement, was recognized as a stopgap, a necessary but temporary step. This long, iterative process, full of fits and starts and learning through failure, laid the technical groundwork for World War II tanks. The culmination of this development was the light tank M3 Stuart, a follow-on to the M2A4, with a recommended 1.5 inches of frontal armor and a combat weight of 14 tons. 4,526 units were completed. It became the first US light tank to see combat with the British Army in North Africa in July 1941, where it was designated Stuart I. The M3 light tank, while a significant early American armored vehicle of World War II, was fundamentally outmatched by its German counterparts in its initial combat roles. Its story is one of adaptation, compromise, and the relentless pursuit of battlefield effectiveness in the face of evolving threats. The M3's baptism of fire occurred on November 19, 1941, during Operation Crusader in North Africa. Of the 165 M3s committed to battle, only 35 remained, revealing critical deficiencies against German medium tanks. While these losses were sometimes attributed to poor British performance on the battlefield, They exposed the M3's insufficient armament, the 37mm gun M5 or M6, and its relatively thin armor. The M3, though reliable for its time, had design flaws. Its fixed forward-firing .30 caliber machine guns were quickly deemed useless by British tankers and removed for storage. The riveted and bolted turret construction was seriously deficient, leading to dangerous spouling and rivets being driven into the interior when struck by enemy fire. Its turret ring diameter, at 46.75 inches, was significantly smaller than the M4's 69 inches, limiting future gun upgrades. The M3's cramped interior, with the loader often doubling as commander, hampered crew effectiveness and survivability. A consistent shortage of reliable gasoline-powered radial engines also forced compromises. While the Continental W670 gasoline engine was praised by British tankers for its reliability, earning the M3 the nickname Honey, 1285 units were built with the less ideal Giberson 10-1000-20 diesel engine. This offered a slightly better cruising range of 90 miles compared to 70 for the gasoline version. The M3's combat failures directly influenced the rapid deployment of more capable medium tanks. By spring 1942, the first American-supplied M3 medium tanks began arriving in the Middle East, followed by M4 medium tanks in summer 1942. The M3 light tank was consequently reassigned to reconnaissance roles, signaling its obsolescence as a primary combat vehicle against tanks. In the Pacific, the M3's limitations were starkly different. In the Philippines, U.S. Army National Guard tank battalions, equipped with 108 M3s, faced the Japanese attack on December 8, 1941. There, the M3s engaged Japanese Type 9 Hago light tanks, which successfully disabled them. During the Guadalcanal campaign from August 1942 to February 1943, Captain Robert L. Denig, Jr. of the U.S. Marine Corps summed up the M3's ineffectiveness against jungle underbrush and fortified positions. At Tarawa Atoll in November 1943, the M3A1's inability to penetrate Japanese bunkers underscored the critical need for greater firepower, spurring the Marine Corps' shift to medium tanks. Despite its shortcomings, the M3 series was a crucial testing ground for technologies later adopted in the M4 Sherman. The M3A1, standardized in May 1941, was an upgraded M3. It incorporated an oil gear turret power traverse system and an interphone system for internal crew communication. Protectoscopes replaced pistol ports on later M3 turrets for improved protection, and M6 periscopes were used by commanders of M3s lacking a cupola. A Westinghouse elevation gyrost stabilizer was even planned for the M3A1 to improve accuracy on the move. The M3A1 saw extensive production, with 4,621 units built between May 1942. Late production M3s fitted with M3A1 turrets were even referred to as Stuart Hybrid by the British War Office. Crucially, experimentation with Cadillac V8 engines and hydromatic transmissions in the M3E2 beginning in June 1941 proved successful. On November 13, 1941, this M3E2 was designated as the light tank M4, a name later given to the medium tank. This illustrates how the M3's continuous engineering and design modifications, driven by direct combat feedback, served as vital testing grounds, laying the groundwork for the M4 medium tank. The M3's story highlights the challenges of equipping armies with new technology and the vital feedback loop between design and battlefield reality. It demonstrates the initial over-reliance on light tanks and the subsequent strategic shift towards heavier, more versatile armored vehicles. The M3, though initially outmatched, remained a valuable asset for Allied forces, with Australian M3s seeing action in the New Guinea campaign and British M3s dispatched to Burma in January 1942. The development and deployment of USA's light tanks during World War II reveal a constant struggle between evolving battlefield needs and established military doctrine. This led to a re-evaluation of their role from potential main combatants to specialized support vehicles. The light tank M5, which began series production in April 1942, was a direct response to avoiding designation confusion with the new M4 medium tank, as the light tank M4 designation from the M3E2 project was quickly changed. Concerns about logistical strain and the complexity of the new automotive components in the M5 initially foreshadowed issues. though these proved largely unfounded. The M5 and its successor, the M5A1, were equipped with quiet Cadillac gasoline engines, each producing 110 horsepower, allowing for stealthy maneuvers, a characteristic often praised by crews like Joseph J. Graham. The M5A1, which began series production in November 1942 and became the most common light tank in Northwest Europe by June 1944, incorporated an improved turret design. This included a rear bustle for radio mounting and a relocated anti-aircraft machine gun mount to the right side of the turret for easier commander access. However, early production pistol ports were deemed ballistic weak spots and were later welded shut, a common theme in tank design. The M5 and M5A1 weighed 16 tons combat loaded. They first saw significant combat deployment on November 8, 1942, during Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. Due to landing craft limitations, they often acted as vanguards. However, the harsh realities of combat in North Africa against German armor from November 1942 to May 1943 definitively exposed the M5 and M5A1 as undergunned and under-armored for a main combat role. Corporal Clara Lamb, in a March 1945 report, critiqued the M5A1's 37mm gun as too small and a waste of ammunition against enemy tanks. This combat experience, coupled with existing doctrinal shifts, led senior American military officers and the armored force leadership to drastically reduce the number of light tanks in armored divisions. By September 1943, armored division tables of organization and equipment, TO&E, were reorganized, reducing light tank allocations from 158 in heavy divisions to 77 in light divisions. Despite these limitations, the M5 and M5A1 were deemed superior to their predecessors and served in significant numbers, with 2074 M5s and 6,810 M5A1s produced. The British Army received 1,031 M5A1s, designating them Stuart VIF, and 2,045 M3A3s, designated Stuart V, under Lend-Lease. The search for a new generation of light tank continued with the T7 series. Initially envisioned with a weight limit of 14 tons, its development quickly spiraled. The T7E2 reached nearly 26 tons, and the T7E5, weighing 27 tons, was ultimately standardized as the medium tank M7. This T7 light tank fiasco highlighted the danger of production vehicles exceeding pilot weight, blurring the lines between light and medium tank roles. Only 7 units of the M7 were built before cancellation, and the British-designed 6-pounder or 57mm gun, initially considered for the T7E2, was rejected by the armored force. Desperate measures were also explored in the early war. Marne and Harrington tanks, such as the CTLS-4s, were impressed into service due to early war uncertainty. However, these were quickly deemed unreliable, mechanically and structurally unsound, underpowered and equipped with unsatisfactory armament, and were declared unfit for service. Observing German airborne tactics spurred the development of the T9 airborne light tank, later designated M22 Locust. This concept faced significant developmental hurdles related to weight and transportability. It exceeded its 7.5-ton stripped-down weight limit, forcing the deletion of features like turret power traverse, a gyrostabilizer, and front-hull machine guns. Despite 830 units being built, its combat application was limited. 9 M22 Locust tanks participated in the Rhine crossing on March 24, 1945, with over half of gliders carrying them lost to enemy fire upon landing. The British M22s even added a Little John muzzle adapter for potentially improved armor penetration with a tungsten core round, though it was often unreliable. Ultimately, the M5 and M5A1, despite their initial concerns, were deemed superior to their predecessors and served in significant numbers, particularly the M5A1 in Northwest Europe. However, their combat failures in Tunisia fundamentally redefined the role of light tanks, shifting them towards reconnaissance and flank security, and leading to a significant reduction in their numbers within armored divisions. The M22 Locust became a specialized airborne asset with limited combat use, highlighting the challenges of designing and deploying highly specialized vehicles in a major conflict. The development of US-ed vehicles in a major conflict, the development of US-ed Ds, light and heavy tanks during World War II, was a complex process driven by perceived threats, evolving battlefield needs, and technological limitations. It often resulted in vehicles that were either underperforming or arrived too late to significantly impact the war. The M3 series light tanks, acknowledged as under-armored and undergunned, prompted the urgent search for next-generation light tanks. This led to the August 1942 meeting where the Ordnance Department and Armored Force leadership formally discussed the need for a new design. Building on the M5A1's powertrain, the Ordnance Committee decided in March 1943 to use it as the basis for a new light tank, the T-24, which would become the M24. The T-24, later standardized as the M24 chassis, was a significant upgrade. It utilized twin Cadillac engines and a new welded armor chassis with a torsion bar suspension system. Its 60-inch turret ring accommodated a three-man crew and was armed with a lightweight 75mm gun T-13E1, later designated 75mm gun M6. This gun used a concentric short recoil system and fired a more destructive high-explosive round than the M5A1's 37mm gun, along with armor-piercing rounds. The M24 could reach 35 miles per hour on level roads and was equipped with a hydromatic transmission offering 8 forward and 4 reverse speeds. With 16-inch wide T72 cast steel tracks, it weighed just under 20 tons. Its armor, at 1 inch on the hull and 1.5 inches on the gun shield, was an improvement over its predecessors. Production began at Cadillac Motors in April 1944 and at Massey Harris Company in July 1944. The M24 began arriving in Northwest Europe in December 1944, just in time for the Battle of the Bulge. Though late for many engagements, it significantly improved reconnaissance and support capabilities for USA forces. Tankers valued its ruggedness. One M24 received 3 direct hits from an anti-tank gun and was repaired in under 12 hours, while another, hit twice in the suspension, remained operational. However, its 75mm gun was still limited against heavier German armor. 25 armor-piercing rounds fired by M24s at 800 yards failed to penetrate the front slope plate of a German self-propelled gun. A total of 4,731 M24 units were produced, and it was affectionately nicknamed Chaffee by the British after Major General Adna R. Chaffee Jr. Beyond its primary role, the M24 chassis also became a platform for specialized variants. The 40mm gun motor carriage M19, based on a modified M24 chassis, mounted twin 40mm automatic guns with a maximum firing rate of 240 rounds. Though 300 were built, none saw combat before the war's end. Similarly, flamethrower tanks were developed from light tank chassis for bunker busting in the Pacific. 24 modified M3A1s, nicknamed Satan, had their 37mm main gun replaced by a British-designed Ronson flame gun. With a fuel capacity of 170 gallons and an effective range of 60-80 yards, they saw action on Saipan and Tinian in 1944. The American-designed E-77 flamethrower tank, based on the M5A1 chassis, with a 3-man crew, saw limited use with the 13th Armored Group in Luzon in 1945. Meanwhile, the concept of a heavy tank for the US and I-1945 Army had a troubled parallel development. The perceived threat from German armored forces after the invasion of Poland initiated this idea in 1940. Initial concepts were ambitious, envisioning a multi-turret design with 4 turrets. This quickly shifted to a single, heavily armed electric power-operated turret. The revised T1 heavy tank was estimated to weigh around 50 tons and was armed with a modified 3-inch T9 anti-aircraft gun, later designated M7, alongside a coaxial 37mm gun. The T1E2 pilot heavy tank, delivered in August 1941, weighed 55 tons, without crew or ammunition, and debuted the day after Pearl Harbor. It featured 5 inches of armor on the front of its turret. This tank was eventually standardized as the M6 heavy tank, weighing a colossal 63 tons. However, the immense weight and logistical challenges of such heavy tanks led to their outright rejection by the Armored Force leadership in a decisive letter in December 1942. General Devers, and December 1942, commanding general of the Armored Force, explicitly stated, No requirement in the armored force for the heavy tank. Despite initial approved funding for over 1,000 units, production was drastically cut, and ultimately, only 40 series production units were built. None ever saw combat. A July 1943 Armored Force report delivered a dismal conclusion on the M6. Its firepower was not commensurate with its weight, its fire control was obsolete, crew ergonomics were poor, ventilation insufficient, transmission unsatisfactory, and accessories inaccessories and corrosion. These damning findings solidified the M6's fate. The M6 heavy tank program, despite its advanced concept, was ultimately a failure, demonstrating the logistical and tactical limitations of super-heavy vehicles for the U.S. Army. The focus instead shifted from heavy tanks to optimizing medium and light tank designs, reflecting a more practical approach to armored warfare. The latter stages of World War II saw a desperate American effort to bridge the gap between its existing, increasingly vulnerable medium tank fleet, the Sherman, and the formidable German heavy tanks. This was driven by battlefield realities and intense technological competition. It led to a series of iterative designs and adaptations, often facing internal resistance and bureaucratic hurdles, ultimately culminating in the M26 Pershing, a tank that arrived too late to significantly impact the European war, but represented a crucial step forward. Even before the Normandy landings, U.S. Army leadership realized that existing medium tanks would be outmatched by fortified German defenses and heavier enemy armor. However, this recognition clashed with persistent internal opposition, particularly from Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, who favored specialized tank destroyers over heavy tanks, hindering the development and deployment of new designs. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, Supreme Allied Commander, rejected a proposed upgrade of the M6A2E1, a T1E1 with a 105mm gun, in an August 1944 cablegram, deeming it not practicable. This reinforced the need for a completely new design. As an immediate stopgap measure, the M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman was created. This up-armored M4A3 featured 4 inches of welded glacis armor and 7 inches on the gun shield, providing significant protection. However, its increased weight, around 42 tons, led to potential spring failure issues. Produced between May and July 1944, 254 units of the Jumbo were a testament to the urgent need. The true leap came with the T-26E series, which would lead to the M26 Pershing. Its development was a protracted battle. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers's request for the T-26 in November 1943 was critical advocacy, pushing it through bureaucratic opposition and securing its eventual production. General George C. securing its eventual production. Marshall even became personally involved in the project, overseeing its production timeline. Initially proposed with a heavy electric transmission, the T-26E1 later adopted a lighter torquetic transmission. The T-26, weighing 46 tons combat loaded, was armed with the powerful 90mm gun M3. This gun, firing M82 APCT rounds, could penetrate approximately 4.7 inches of armor at 500 yards. With M304 HFAT hypershot rounds, its penetration increased significantly to about 8.7 inches of armor at 500 yards, making it capable of engaging German heavy armor. The T-33 APT round was even developed to specifically counter the highly sloped Panther glacis. In January 1945, the Zebra mission saw the rushed deployment of the first T-26E3s to the front lines. This enabled crucial battlefield evaluation against German armor, providing invaluable real-world data and experience for future tank development. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, whose Third Army received some of these M26, had also ordered improvised up-armoring of his M4A3 76W tanks, underscoring the desperate need for better protection. The M26 Pershing's combat debut, though limited, was significant. Just over 200 units were available by VE Day. Its eventual adoption and deployment signaled a re-evaluation of tank doctrine, moving away from solely relying on tank destroyers. Post-war, the M26 was designated General Pershing, signifying its importance as a symbol of American armored capability and a crucial evolutionary leap in tank design. Its delayed arrival and limited combat exposure in World War II however, challenged the idea that American armor was always technologically or strategically ahead, illustrating the intense arms race and the persistent challenges of military development in wartime. Yet, the M2006 heavens, not a military development in wartime. The intense pressure to counter German armor drove numerous parallel, often desperate, initiatives. Consider the M6A2E1, for instance. A proposal for up-armoring and up-gunning the M6 was made in summer 1944. Detect. This was a direct, urgent response to the powerful German heavy tanks emerging on the battlefield. A cablegram detailing this concept was sent to General Eisenhower on August 2, 1944, but within weeks, Eisenhower, facing logistical and strategic considerations, rejected the M6A2E1 on August 18, 1944. This decision underscored the complex interplay of battlefield needs, production realities, and command priorities. Another avenue explored was the T-14 assault tank requirement. Agreement on its necessity was reached in March 1944. The first T-14 pilot tank had already arrived at APG in July 1943 for evaluation. Yet, despite the perceived need, the T-14 project was officially cancelled in December 1944. However, some pragmatic, interim solutions did emerge. The M4A3E2, affectionately known as the Jumbo, was one such success. Disannexed in March 1944, such a production agreement for 254 units was swiftly established. This up-armored Sherman provided much-needed additional protection. It entered combat in northwest Europe in late 1944, a testament to the American capacity for rapid, though sometimes limited, adaptation. Field commanders, like Third Army, also took matters into their own hands. They up-armored 100 M4A376W tanks in less than a month. This battlefield ingenuity supplemented factory efforts. Meanwhile, the long-gestating T-26 project continued its arduous path towards reality. The War Department had initially approved production of just *10 T-26 on May 24, 1943. Recognizing the growing need, Lieutenant Gen. Devers requested production of 250 T-26 on November 13, 1943. This vital order was finally placed on December 16, 1943. Even General Marshall inquired of Eisenhower about the urgent need for the T-26 on January 15, 1944. The Ordnance Department optimistically believed the first T-26 production units could roll out by October 1944, yet bureaucratic and technical hurdles persisted. The T-26 was redesignated as Heavy Tank T-26 on June 29, 1944. Series production of the T-26E3 only truly began in November 1944, reflecting the persistent delays in bringing this crucial tank to the front. Its standardization as the heavy tank M26 finally occurred in March 1945. But by then, the war in Europe was rapidly drawing to a close. The first 20 T-26E3s were rushed to Europe for the urgent Zebra mission in January 1945. They immediately faced the crucible of battle. The first T-26E3 tank-on-tank combat action, involving the Fireball, occurred on February 26, 1945. Though the Fireball was lost, it marked a turning point in American armored capability. Another 40 M26 tanks saw significant combat action upon their arrival in Europe in February 1945, saw significant combat tank. In March 1945, an M26 T-26E3 was famously filmed destroying a Panther tank, a vivid demonstration of its newfound potency. M26 were notably involved in the critical capture of the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen on March 7, 1945. By the war's end, 310 heavy tank M26 were in place in Western Europe, with 200 of them issued to field units. Their belated impact, though significant, was limited to the final months. The Pacific Theater also saw their arrival. A dozen 12 M26 were sent to Okinawa in July 1945